My dear friends, those that are listening to us on a live streaming on Facebook and LinkedIn, and of course those that have joined and will be joining us in today's live session. It is an enormous privilege and really an honor to have a session today, Eco-Civilization Talk with dear colleague, friend Indra Adnan. Hello, Indra.
Hi there, Violetta. Indeed, my privilege and joy as well.
Well, Indra will not share the challenges and wisdoms of possible political alternative with us by herself. She has brought on board two of her dear friends, and we will have the privilege to meet them during the session. But before Indra takes over, and we join her flow of thoughts and presentations and hopefully some small provocations as well. Indra, I would like to say a couple of words or actually ask you a few questions that the audience can get to know you a bit more, better. And it's sometimes kind of boring to talk about bios, but you have four very distinctive roles that you play. You are a system convener, and I would love you to explain this a little bit more, because as far as I'm concerned, this is a new evolving role. Social therapist, a writer, and network builder. So my first question would be just, what prompted you, inspired you to step on this path?
Well, it depends how far back you want to go, Violetta. You know, and I think I'm gonna make sure that this this discussion between us and the webinar that's following is going to follow along the principles of, you know, connecting the personal to the purpose, if you like, and always bring that back into it so that all of us can be involved, you know, really on our own terms. So to take it back to a very personal starting point, for me as a child, I had a lot of death in my childhood. And I also had the experience of moving very young from the country of my birth to Britain. And so as a child growing up, there was a great sense of being outside of something and having very little agency. You know, I went to a convent school as a child, and I didn't really understand why my mother had to suffer so very much through her life. We lost my brother. She lost 6 out of 7 of her siblings while I was only a teenager due to cancer. And it was very difficult for me to really get a grip on where is my power and my agency. You know, even as I was being educated, I felt on the outside and not really learning the stuff I needed to learn. So that's really what my life's journey has been about. You know, what is the agency of a human being? Where is our collective agency as people? And, you know, what is the kind of impact we can have on the environment and on the planet that we're occupying? That's always been my big question. So I would say, you know, all through my life, I've taken different steps towards understanding that better. And now I'm arrived here at this political platform.
Well, that explains the project that you launched together with your colleague, Pat Kane, called the Alternative UK. And this is quite a famous sort of establishment political platform. And you put forward a really interesting question, which is, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? And my question is politics broken?
And I think that's a very valid question. And obviously that's the one I'm going to be addressing over this coming hour. But let's say that nothing is ultimately broken. You know, everything evolves. The bigger question now, after 5 years of being in this question and sharing a platform with people who are really outside of the political system as we know it, meaning the party political system. So, across Europe, we're all really experiencing, and in the United States as well, a party political system that attracts certain kinds of action and actors. In Europe, it's only 2% of people, between 2 and 5% of people, the largest amount being in Austria, interestingly enough, that actually belong to political parties. But what's happening outside of that? I want to know if it's such a small amount of people who are really defining what are the issues, what is the narrative, what should we be thinking about, what does power mean, what's happening outside of that small amount of people. And if I think that we're all evolving all the time, then surely at this point something new could be available to us, especially since we're facing these multiple crises. So you might say, if I was an alien coming to visit the country, to the planet, actually, I would say, oh, that's in a mess, right? Because it's clearly in a mess. But also I would be thinking, well, the people of this planet are going to come together and solve this mess. And I'm thinking, well, how do they come together? Our party politics doesn't offer that opportunity. It does the opposite. It divides us. So that's really the big frame, let's say, in which we can begin to answer this question. And I think it's really more a question of the political system than politics itself. It's a much wider, to have a systemic approach to that, I think gives us some clues.
Well, this is a good prompt for my next question, because the central to the vision of an alternative politics is the interdependency of the complex individual, the community, and the planet, as you put it, basically talking about I, we world. And just a little question, why complex only in front of the individuals?
Well, I think it's a response to the current situation, right? So I think if anybody was thinking about society or they're thinking about the planet, it doesn't, it doesn't hurt us or doesn't challenge us even to say, oh, it's complex, right? But the way that our current politics conceives of the human being, it's mostly as an economic, it's a homo economicus. This is an economic material entity, right? And that's the point at which we begin our question, our inquiry. Are we really material entities? And if one, and it's, Maslow's hierarchy, of course, is very responsible for making everybody believe that you start with the material needs and everything else will solve itself. But it hasn't proved that way. It hasn't proved that way. If you have a politics that really focuses on the material needs of people first, then they get trapped in that place. And very often politics thinks its work is done as long as the material needs are getting met. That is clearly not enough, because now we have mental health problems. We have, big gaps in people getting their emotional needs met. There's so much missing from that. And so our very first step is to say, no, we're not homo economicus, we're complex, I call them biopsychosocial spiritual entities. And let's start from there.
Yeah, indeed. And basically what I hear you saying is that besides the physical infrastructure, there are many other infrastructures that humans need in order to holistically evolve. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that later on. My last but not least little question is related to the book that you published recently. It's been over a year now. The politics of waking up, power and possibility in the fractal age. Waking up, sorry, power and possibility in the fractal age. A very attractive title. And I know that you've organized several book reading sessions, like a club. So I wonder, what have you learned in this direct communication with people who attended these sessions?
That is such an important question, really, Violetta, because it's very easy. And I would say the majority of people who are interested in a new politics, we'll think about the change through a certain kind of analysis, and a certain kind of mapping of the ideas, the ideology, the theories, and so on. And you could come up with a whole picture of what politics should be like. However, will that make any difference? Simply to present a new ideology to people? I'm not sure that it can. And in fact, in the UK, we've had hundreds of new political parties start up, literally hundreds, since Brexit, because everybody's trying to capture that public space of, they think there's a vacuum. But ideology doesn't capture people's attention necessarily. What I know, and one of the real challenges of a new politics, is to conceive of it as something that is happening to you right now at this moment in this relationship between you and I. This is political, this relationship between you and I. And Karen O'Brien, who's going to be speaking in the second half of today's seminar, webinar, will be going more into this. There's more. She's done incredible work on really being able to show the power of the fractal and of relationship, and what happens when people move beyond, the merely mapped out theoretical idea of how change happens, which is mostly flat. But what I found out in the book clubs is that you have to create quite an intimate space for relationship to occur, even in a Zoom room. That has to be possible. And that secondly, everybody has to be able to take their own path. Increasingly, because of the internet and because of our relationship with the internet, people have really been able to develop their own, in a way, self-sovereignty, their own path to development. And they're going to expect that more and more from everything that they encounter. So the best that politics can do really is to open up spaces for people to get on their path, to discover their own agency. And that's what I'm really going to be describing, that it's, in a sense, a political obligation to create space for people, not to define their actions, help them find themselves, really. And then, more will follow from the collaboration and the integration that occurs through that. So I do think that, and I'm just going to stay a bit longer with your question because I think it's so very important, that COVID was an incredible period of time. I think we'll go back, history will show that it was an incredible period of development because people spent so much time in this kind of a Zoom room, building relationship with others that they never did, even in their own neighborhoods or in towns or cities. People didn't have to do that because they were, at home with their family and then out with their work. Those were the two sets of relationships they mostly had. Of course, people have friends, I'm not saying that, but what happened during COVID was an incredible opportunity to meet others, often for the first time, and discuss the world affairs in a very intimate space. And that, I'm sure, history will show that made a difference.
Well, this is a really interesting point about these intimate spaces, which we haven't really seen being practiced widely in the political space, but I can kind of sense that that's exactly what's going on behind the closed doors in the very limited, closed political circles. So how to bring that to the open space and ensure something like that to the masses that they can involve? Well, I'll be listening very carefully what you're going to be discussing today. And that will be all from my side. Really, thank you, Indra. I hope that people got to know you a little bit better. And meanwhile, hello, Cosima, hello, Martina. And we had Nini for a second with us as well, but she's coming from, she's tuning in from Myanmar, and the connection is not really stable. So I'm sure she's going to come back. But now, Indra, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. That was a great opportunity, Violetta, to be in conversation with you. And it's kind of illustrative straight away of the quality of a new politics, that, you know, one always lands into a relationship and then moves from there. And it would be good for me to make some form of relationship with everybody who's in this Zoom room. But I know this is a webinar rather than a seminar, so we won't have any breakout rooms, but I will stop periodically with what I'm sharing with you to open up question spaces, and hope that you will have questions. If you
allow me, just a little comment. There is a great dialogue going on in the chat already. So let's encourage people to continue this and share, because we will save everything and share it as well then with you. So these thoughts should never be lost, because they are inspirational thoughts that you provoke, and we certainly would like to learn from them as well.
Thank you, and I'll be reading them avidly afterwards. So I'm going to, I hope that everybody's all right with the fact I'm going to be showing slides. You'll notice that these are not slides with lots and lots of points on them. You don't need to take any notes. That's not the point of the slide. It's really that bringing images into the conversation is evoking more of a creative, really trying to reach your own artistic, creative self in the process, which is not normal, I know, when we're talking about politics. I think I wonder if I could invite people to go on mute generally, because I think I can hear somebody having their lunch. And I'm going to share now the, am I going to go on, sorry. Am I going to go on webinar mode? Is that all right? Can you see my slides, everybody? Great. Okay, so this is really just a very quick bio, which in a way Violetta has already touched on. But perhaps more recently, I'm a social psychotherapist, but my political life maybe began about 15 years ago when I decided that I should turn to politics as the accepted source of power in European countries, and also in the States, mostly what I'll be able to cover in this webinar. And I was part of a political think tank for 10 years and wrote many papers asking the question, is politics broken, and what's the alternative? I also founded something called the Soft Power Network and wrote a book called Soft Power Agenda. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And now here's my book, The Politics of Waking Up. But let's orientate ourselves a little bit in the present moment. And I know that sometimes when I'm in a Zoom room, it's easy to forget that right outside our door and in the space that we're sharing, it's a very challenging world. And in Europe right now, we are, we're almost, one might describe it as jerked back into the 20th century, because there's a war now on our doorstep, and we're being asked to consider the same things that maybe people were thinking very hard about 50 and 100 years ago. These things can never stop being important to us. At the same time, even before the war broke out in the Ukraine, maybe more urgent, not maybe more urgent, always as a backdrop to anything that we're talking about is the environmental crisis, which is really at an extreme point now, and something that really doesn't make its way enough to the front pages of our newspapers, and is often used as a political football rather than be right in the center of the politics that we are looking at. And then most recently, we did have a common crisis between us all over the world that we acknowledged as a common crisis, which was COVID, which many of us would say arose directly from the environmental crisis. But what was important about this time, as I mentioned in my conversation just now with Violetta, is that somehow in many places around the world, in an unusual way, we were experiencing something very similar, going into lockdown, wearing masks in the street, asking questions about who are we, what is our society, where does our agency lie, and what's gone wrong. So this central question, what is agency? And I explained to you how I started to ask that question, but it's a common question now on everybody's lips. You know, what can be done? Is there anything to be done about these multiple crises that we're in? And again, I mentioned this, that in the power structures that we have at the moment, known as our party political structures, only 2%, only between 2 and 5% of the people are actively involved. So how are the rest of us experiencing our agency? Some of us live in democracies. Do any of us live in fully functioning democracies is a good question. But the political system is not delivering on the multiple crises. And when we're talking about party politics, it's quite obvious. Maybe it's at its worst in the UK, which is why we were happy to start with the UK, where we are so profoundly divided. That is the design of our political system, where, you know, roughly 50% of people are actively invested in the failure of the other 50%. It's really a design, if you like, to be amazed at, given the possibilities of human intelligence. And we started the Alternative UK, which is now the Alternative Global, actually on the very day that Jo Cox was murdered. This was 5 days before the Brexit referendum. I was in Denmark at the time. Uffe will know that I was with, Violetta will know that I was with our mutual friend Uffe Elbæk, who started the Alternative Party in Denmark. And I was learning about a new kind of politics. And on this day where a politician was murdered simply for taking one side of the debate, I felt that was the day that I said enough is enough, something has to be pursued. Our politics is broken, and what's the alternative? However, I want to put a different proposition right from the beginning, which is that we don't simply live in a kind of broken possibility or a broken society. We've been in what I would call a revolution for over 30 years, a revolution of agency. And by that, I mean that since the birth of the internet, every single person who has access to a mobile phone or to broadband or to any kind of connection is able to begin the journey of developing their own agency in a number of ways. Firstly, they have access to information. More importantly, they have access to each other, are able to mobilize. And perhaps the most important thing is that they are able to see themselves taking part in these integrated or integrating human networks. So more and more, the environment that we live in the digital age begins to echo or mirror the kind of networked life that also exists in our bodies. You know, we are also ourselves networked entities, and we're beginning to see that the world outside us can be seen in this light, that we're not simply separate from the world, that we are part of this world. And the way that the internet has been developing is to show us back the infinite network possibilities that actually make our bodies capable of working as complex entities. So 30 years of revolution, as I've been calling it, pretty much under the radar as a revolution, it's not a capital R revolution, has been delivering at least in, these 4 spheres of change. So if you look at this is a classic, what I would call a 4-quadrant model, where we're looking at the top 2 quadrants as what's going on for individuals, and the bottom 2 quadrants, what's going on for us collectively. On the left at the top, we're talking about the individual's internal development. On the right, the individual's actions, the things that have changed, what are they doing differently? So for the individual, the revolution has helped us to become more informed, more connected. As a result of that, we're kind of waking up to our environment. We're understanding much more than we did before the internet was there. And we're realizing pennies are dropping around why we're in the state we're in, why my life is the way it is. All of this is becoming slowly available to us, especially through our connections with others. And as a result, on the top right, there's more mobilizing. There's creations of new bubbles of understanding. We're finding other people like us who see the world through our lenses. This causes problems as much as it causes opportunities. But let's say it's a mixture of problem and opportunity, but it's occurring very fast. But we're also able to see ourselves performing. So we, you know, if you think about the fact that, you know, to take the most crude example, you know, women and maybe young people never saw themselves in the public space before the internet came along. They were always watching a certain kind of man in the public space telling us what was what and leading in that space. Now suddenly through the internet, even the youngest person can post their own thoughts, can post their own image, can you know, share, you know, their opinions in the public space. That is accessible to everyone. And as a result of that, you know, we are living different lives. It's hard to quantify, but I think, you know, again, from the future, people will describe this as a revolution that was taking place over this 30 years. And we're beginning then to prototype solutions to questions that were never really even asked before this began. On the bottom half, we're really talking about what's happening to us collectively. And on the left, this is really describing culture. We're beginning to dethrone old authorities. I mean, in the UK right now, this is happening at huge speed with the death of the Queen. You know, the monarchy and the royal family are being very acutely dethroned at the moment, even as we're holding them dear with some sort of appreciation for what they managed to do in the past. There's a dethroning going on, but that also happened for the church, for example, or for politicians. You know, this dethroning of previous authorities has been happening for a while. Something new is emerging. It's not that clear. We're going to talk a little bit about that. What might be emerging to take place, to replace those things that we had before. There's a lot of diversifying going on. Many, many different forms of authority have appeared. And there's a lot of active weaving, people trying to bring things into some sort of relationship with each other. And on the right, we're really talking about what are the structures that allow all of this to happen. First of all, it was looking all like chaos to some people. It still looks like chaos. But those who are really paying attention and watching and taking part, we can see these networks arising, or meshworks, which are like the 3D form of a network, you know, new DAOs, you know, distributed autonomous organizations are taking shape, and fractals. We'll go into fractals a little bit later. But overall, this is, for me, this is the substance, if you like, of the 30 years of revolution that have been going on. So very, very rich possibility. And, you know, in this possibility, I want to note a couple of very fundamental shifts in our awareness, or, you know, yeah, our operation of power. So although both hard power and soft power have always coexisted, our awareness of a shift from hard power. So hard power is really explaining guns and money, the ability to coerce, the ability to force outcomes, which seem to be the way that power was really being exercised all over the world. And that's, you know, without access to hard power, you don't have power. But much more over this period, we've understood much more about something that was always there, but I'm calling it soft power, which is the power of, you know, it's the power of attraction. It's the power of the ability to cause relationship. It's the power of narrative and storytelling. And if I was just to use the best example really is the power of the American dream. How through Hollywood or through the spectacle of democracy in America, causing such attraction for people all over the world, drew people to America, and in so doing confirm it as a superpower. And through that attraction, America can have influence over the whole world. So it's not so easy to really see the role, for example, of Mickey Mouse, but Mickey Mouse was, you know, a huge character in the establishment of American soft power. And in the 80s, 90s, when American hard power was really showing itself to be quite ineffective, it had just, you know, failed to win the war with Vietnam, which was a very small country. Joseph Nye, who first coined this term, soft power, said, it doesn't matter how many wars we lose, America will always be dominant because of its soft power, its ability to attract people to the dream that it is proposing all the time, and it keeps churning out and generating. And we might say that that was true until quite recently. And now the question is the American soft power waning? Is the American dream shown to be quite empty? This is a big question. And if we're not in the American dream anymore, what kind of dream are we in? So in the process of all of that, you know, the other thing that is going on for anyone who has access to the internet, especially social media, is this growing understanding of our emotional needs and how our emotional needs are being met. So as opposed to thinking only that we need food and shelter, you know, the material needs I was referring to at the beginning, understanding more about how we are driven and motivated by getting certain needs met. And these are the 9 that I studied as a Human Gibbons social psychotherapist, which explain how a human being, in order to really survive, needs to become a social entity. So how the human being becomes social becomes a different form of nutrition, actually. And here they are, the 9 points of nutrition that emotional nutrition that every human being needs to become social, because when you become social, you can survive as a material entity. So the need for attention, the need for status, the need for belonging, for autonomy, for security, you can read them through achievement, for intimacy, meaning of purpose, privacy. This is, I would say, the collection of you know, needs that every society should be conscious of and consciously designing into their idea of an adequate you know, community for people to flourish in. When they can find attention, when they can find status and security and autonomy, then people will be able to flourish. However, what's happened until now is that, just to go back for a second, is that we have been living within a growth economy that has tried to get all of these needs met through consumption. So if you, for example, need naturally status, you know, the way that our economy has been working is to offer you a handbag or a pair of trainers. And for a moment, you know, your desire for status has been satisfied. It doesn't last long. It actually fuels your addiction to buying that kind of thing, because the fulfillment of status is very superficial and doesn't last long. So this is really how we've become addicted to the growth economy through consumerism and the power of advertising. But it also is the evidence that if we can get these needs met in better ways, then we would have a lot of available energy from people to generate their own flourishing. So how might we do that? Are we only emotionally needy people? no, we also have within us the resources to get those emotional needs met if we're not being constantly either hijacked, triggered, or if our lives are not so toxic that we can't use our own resources to get our needs met. So in a way, one might say that our political objective is to create the conditions in which people can use their own resources to be together and get their needs met. That really, in a way, is the holy grail of politics. And one of the great tools that is currently being used for good or evil is the power of the dreaming brain. Through the use of our imagination, we can prepare ourselves for a better future. And there are many, many initiatives that gather people and invite them to use that capacity to think forward into what kind of a future we might have so that we can prepare ourselves and start to design forward. However, we should never forget that our dreaming brain has already been captured, if you like, in the past by the American dream, by propaganda, by the growth economy. It's not necessarily free, to use as we wish. Even worse than that, it is constantly being triggered by fear. So, a headline that a newspaper might generate in order to sell more newspapers sets us off very quickly into catastrophizing our own lives. We are very quickly triggered into fearful scenarios that stop us being able to be creative, forward-thinking, generative human beings. So all of this has to be taken into account when we're thinking about what is the real goal of a new politics. And I would say the goal of a new politics is to create the conditions in which the complex human being has the right community around them to be able to generate a future that impacts the planet well. So this is not something that we can simply ask people to switch on and deliver, but it can be the goal of the politics to connect the complex human being, as we said at the beginning, to the flourishing planet via really great communities in which they can live. So this I, we world axis, which I'm just highlighting on the right, has its shadow, and you'll recognize it, some of you, that, the complex human being could also be being triggered or harnessed right now by the possibility of our psychosocial trauma and grief. It could also be really emphasizing the divided, powerless communities, and it could be enthralled to the dying planet. So, I'm making it really crude here, but I think that our ability to notice where we could go in a minute by minute, in a way, day to day, hour by hour, day to day, is to be choosing between the dark and the light of our own possibilities, not to escape any of them. We can't escape any of a shadow isn't there to be escaped. It's there to be understood and to reflect our potential, our possibilities. So that is the basic proposition, if you like, that in order to deliver a new policy, in order to create the regenerative eco-civilization that we're all, dreaming of, we have to start with getting the emotional needs of people met in the lives and the communities that they live in ways that have a good impact upon the planet. So I might just stop for a second there and see if anybody's got any questions. Oh, yes, I can see a question there. Donna.
Hi, Indra, I'm loving all of this, and it's so resonant with much of the work and the confluence that's going on in the world. So I've been so looking forward to this conversation with you, which is really cool. So I'll just jump to the very last comment part of the comment that I made in there around really would love to dig deeper into that what I would describe as at times an artificial schism between the I and the we. Yes, we're finding each other, and at the same time, we're working really hard to build bridges with all ordinary citizens, wherever they are on the journey. And it's evident that that's where you are as well. And there's also some discussion about this need to shift from the ego to the eco, which often can be interpreted as an altruistic kind of let go of your personal shit and just embrace this larger, bigger, more important than you other or whatever. And so what I love about this conversation where, and maybe that's where you're going anyway, is digging deeper around it really is and. It's not either or. And that by making this journey, we do become better able to embrace all of it. And it's all the things you've discussed so far. And there's other comments in the chat in terms of that zooming in and zooming out, becoming more conscious as, in terms of what's really going on for us at a very deep personal individual level. And yet at the same time, making the connection. So I've gone on long enough here. It's more coming from a place of resonance and excitement at what you're opening up in the conversation. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you so much, Donna. And I appreciate you bringing that to the light, because I would say that we are still broadly in the narrative of, I versus we. But just to share with you, I'm a lifelong Buddhist, and my own experience is to think of them as three realms of the same thing. So, I definitely have an I. I experience my I-ness, mostly when I'm different from, you or from my partner, or from, I experience that there is something sovereign about myself. But there's another part of me that can be in a we-ness, and they don't contradict each other. They're just a different way of being for a moment. And the way I can be with you or with everyone in this room and really feel that commonality is another realm of the same existence. I think the thing that is most hard to describe to someone who doesn't choose it is how one can be planetarian as well, without shifting anything, but just feel the oneness of yourself and feel your relationship to the planet. People can think about it when they, sometimes in a big crowd, they could think about it, or when they're moved by something and can sense that it's something happening to more than just themselves, or when they're connecting with nature, for example, can feel something much, much bigger than themselves. But these are, in my mind, three realms of the same human being, three realms of the same existence. I would say it's important to emphasize all of them, because if you lose the self in the we, there's also the loss of responsibility. You become less responsible to the we in yourself. There's always a danger of that there's so much letting go that, you might not, play your own role, your very unique role in the whole. So, but to move easily through those things without really needing to move anywhere at all, to me is a blessing if you can do that. It's very, very common to people, until they are told that no, it's this or that. You have to choose. Are you an individualist or are you a socialist? I see that as a fake divide, and maybe again part of what politics does to us, to ask us to choose. I'm seeing the time.
Indra, yeah. There is one question from anonymous attendee in the Q&A section. How are the most vulnerable communities teachers for us all in this effort?
How are the most vulnerable? I'm not quite sure I've got the question.
Yeah,
How are
and
the
if
most
you want to take a
vulnerable?
look at it in the Q&A, you will be, you can.
Oh, yes, sorry.
the original.
How are the most vulnerable communities?
And then we have.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's a good question. And
then we have Ferial, and that's it too.
Yeah. I would say let's take away. Well, maybe I would say that is another distinction between the old politics and the new politics. That the most vulnerable, or maybe the least privileged as well, are seen as something that has to be dealt with, somehow. How do we manage this, right? Whereas in the new politics, they appear as the intelligence missing from the system, right? So if you think about the socio-political system that we have now, most of the intelligence informing that is coming from, a certain idea of what is important, or what is powerful, or what is capable. However, we haven't been able to solve our social problems. That's just clear. And it's, if you're living in a community yourself, you'll know that, the solutions that are coming towards you have nothing to do with your real needs. What your real needs aren't being noticed by the people who are offering the solutions. So I would say that the information is coming from the most vulnerable, is the intelligence that is missing from the system at the moment. And when we open up these spaces of community, they become the places where we can actually meet this intelligence. And that's why they become so very important. I hope that's answering your question.
Great, thank you. And this anonymous became known. So it's Paloma Powell from California visiting Karen O'Brien in Norway. That's why she's
right.
as anonymous. Okay. Thank you. Ferial, go ahead.
Yeah, I really love this conversation so very much, because this whole we thing, I think it's such an incredible paradigm shift for us. But it actually is us. And this time that we've spent on the planet, we've almost moved away from that true nature. And that is at the heart of kind of, I want to say fixing, but actually just really bringing us back to who we are. Because immediately what you said there, we see the vulnerable peoples on the earth, we've got to fix that problem. But equally, we see the bad faith actors, we've got to fix that problem. Right. But actually, if we truly embracing the I and we, and not that I am this individual and I'm part of a collective, but that I am individual and I am collective. When you make that shift, I think what starts to happen is you start to realize when I embody that wherever I go, whether it be bad faith actors, top down, whoever, the people at the bottom struggling, wherever we're going, our energy changes that scenario. So it becomes about getting one by one, each of us into that new paradigm. And that is exciting for me, because whilst you, all of us in this room cannot change everything, we can affect one person's life. And that can make an incredible difference. So Indra, thank you so much for what you're sharing. It's amazing.
Thank you, Ferial. And I'm always so grateful for your incredible energy. I mean, I just think I believe in you. But I also want to, and I'm going to invite Pat Kane later on, who's going to come and talk about the appropriate media systems that belong to this kind of a new politics. And I think we should be ambitious about the impact of the new narratives that we can generate that would have an effect much wider than simply one by one. The one by one will always be important, but it's not the only medium, if you like. It can be, as the internet is showing already, it can be millions by millions. Let's see what we can imagine. So I'm going to go quickly back to this.
Indra,
Yeah.
allow me just to say hello to Pat Kane, because
Yes.
he joined us. And just one quick last question. Somehow, we're always talking that we're moving from individual now possibly towards more collective, but a large portion of the world actually lived for many decades a collective, and are now trying to move into individual, and already based on several years of experience, I belong to that world too, we are confused, because individual is not bringing the satisfaction that we thought will when we try to break away from the collective. So I was wondering, have you worked with these former socialist countries or people from that region as well to see how we can bring the balance into this? Because we're coming from two different paths, possibly in the long run, trying to get to the same new destination together.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I personally haven't worked with the communities that you're describing, but I have worked with communities, for example, in Japan, or, you know, countries where it's the social norm to be much more collective. And in fact, I often describe to my friends that I had somebody coming over from Japan to work with it was a music studio here in London, and I was keeping track of looking after her. And I said, how are you doing, Mitsuko? And she said, I'm great. I'm learning how to become an individual, and that was a really important thing for her, to learn how to become an individual. On the other hand, when I go to Japan, I'm learning how to be more part of a much broader idea, not just of my family, but of the whole of society, that I'm responsible to it, I'm part of it. And I think that really what we're talking about is different cultures coming into connection with each other to create something more whole, which is more fluid between the self and the community and the planet. We're actively bringing in indigenous wisdom now as well, to help us understand better about how to be more planetary in our consciousness. I mean, this is an incredible moment of seeing the diversity and learning the fluidity to move between these different realms of being. Because sometimes, even in your own family, you'll know that it's better to be en famille, like, okay, we're going out together, we're going out on a day together as a family. Other times, you really want to pay attention to one of your children, or to the husband, or to a visitor who appears at the door. So you have to be able to move in between this sense of individual need, collective need, planetary need. We're capable of all of that. And, what the internet has been doing over the last 30 years is rehearsing us all the time. And one hopes that one is able to get back to the sense of self-management, self-sovereignty. Can I be in charge of my own fluidity rather than only be triggered constantly by others? That's one of the goals, I think, of education, is to help us grow up in that way. And it's not just for young people, as we know, it's an education that we're all trying to experience. Now, because of these great questions, I can see that my time really has slipped a lot. And I'm going to ask Karen for forgiveness if I just take another 10 minutes to do, just to indicate what has arisen over this last 10 years or so that we can point at, that we would say it's happening, right? And then I will hand over to Karen and then over to Pat. And I hope that we don't overstay Pat's availability to us, because he's got to get on a stage and sing at a certain point. We're all living quite interesting lives. So back to my screen share. Okay. Oops, nearly saw all my private messages there. Right. So I wanted to really emphasize that as we move into this new way of being together on the planet through the internet, it's more than simply, what am I doing with my day and what am I thinking or feeling? The whole experience of being alive at this time requires what we call an ontological shift. We have a new relationship with our world, no longer looking, for example, at nature as something that we can control or that we can extract from to get our needs met, that we're actually trying to bring in this more alive, regenerative possibility. Within that, I'm always asking the question, because we're not all the same, right? And, there's an assumption in our little bubble that we might, share values and, share our dreams, and we're more or less on the same page, and are we in the same bubble? But I would say even in this room, there's probably quite a lot of distinctions in the way that we might act upon the world. And I did a little exercise to ask a very basic question, which for me is, there's a difference between a kind of triangle way of behaving and a circle way of behaving. And the triangle way is really to do with having an impact upon your environment. This might be sort of more what we call left-brained initiated, and sometimes thought of as a more male way of acting upon a problem, but certainly not exclusively. And then there's the more, what I call circular way of acting upon your environment. And this is more to do with emphasizing relationship, creating space for things to flourish, always emphasizing the context within which something can flourish. So, even in the smallest groups of people, we'll have different ways of working. And in that question of the various forms of agency, I just want to bring briefly into the space this idea of integral development that many of us are aware of, that there are different kinds of agency that when we're young, we develop them very fast. But as we're older, we never lose sight of these different forms of agency, but we bring them into being at different times. So in our political world, I would say that we can identify them as, maybe some people want to make change happen through protest. Some want to make change happen through building institutions. Some are more strategic. They're looking at groups of people and tribes and maybe playing one off against the other. Some are much more egalitarian. They're looking at the whole of the population and thinking there's nothing more important that everyone should have human rights. And then others still are community builders who maybe see this lot of diversity, these many forms of action need containers to all be able to act at once, not to take it in turns, and it's not a zero-sum game between them. But it's good for us to know ourselves and to ask ourselves, what is my preferred form of action? And when I described myself to you, Violetta, as a systems convener, what I meant by that is that I'm very much an observer of what's going on. I like to, rather than invent things, I might invent them, but it's really in response to what I see emerging. So, I'm really busy looking, and then I watch what I see as systemic activity and do my best to connect the dots, maybe sometimes introduce things to each other to see if more is generated as a result. But that's my preferred form. But if without the others, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I'm doing. I need the protesters, I need the institution builders, I need the strategists, I need those fighting for human rights, I need the space makers. None of it can be done without. But when I think about how these can all be contained, all of these, can they just be out there in the wider internet? Because at the moment it looks unmanageable. And what I'm proposing really is that we need to build containers of these diverse actions. And the most obvious way to do that is to do that geographically in the places that we live, whether it's a town or a city or a neighborhood, that we can create some sort of a container for the people who live together because they have that in common, at least, that it matters to them what happens in the space that they're living. But if you're thinking then about containers, how do you, within that container, find the common things that you can do, even when you have so many different forms of agency? And again, I'm bringing back this idea of the 4 quadrants, that you should always look at it at least in these 4 different ways. You know, how do you get the emotional needs of people met, top left? What kinds of tools and practices should we be developing? What kind of a culture, you know, would really forge and really liberate the energies that we have? And what are the structures that we need to hold these things well? So these are just 4 very basic ways into the question of how to build the containers. And then if we are living, you know, in a town or a city, to always remember that we, people like us, the ones who turn up to the webinars, what I'm talking about is the usual suspects. You know, we are the guys who've always been doing that. We're always going to do it. It's our interest. But who are the people who would like to be part of this that we are ritually excluding? You know, in any place that I've worked with, there's an inside and an outside. And how do we enlarge the space for the people who are just outside to become part of what we're doing? But never to imagine that we're including everyone. There's always going to be people who are not interested at all in what people like us are up to. And when we're thinking about designing containers, they might be the most important people to keep in mind, that we should always design containers for the people who don't give a damn about what we're doing. Because if they're on the outside of what we're trying to design, then we remain vulnerable to everything that we're doing being hijacked or sabotaged by people who do know how to reach those people. So always keep at least those 3 tribes, if you like, in mind. And here I'm just showing you how these kinds of community agency networks, I describe them, are definitely being designed, and they're appearing everywhere. I'm just going to flip quite fast through them now. This is a room in Plymouth where we started to see people coming together, thinking about various forms of agency, trying to map out what it is, not only that they are, but what kind of a future they want. They know that they have to emphasize this incubator-like space. People, development needs to be held. It can't just be directed. It's like a womb. You know, these containers are like wombs that give rise to the most incredible complex entities. Nature has the same. It creates pods, you know, it creates pupas. There's always a space within which really complex things arise. And I just want to use these patterns because they're very available to us in nature. If we're looking for new structures compared to the old ones, we only really need to appreciate what's already holding us and keeping us, you know, in a sense, nourished. Although if we trash it any longer, we might find that it can't do that, or it won't do that for us anymore. So when we're talking about something like a great community agency network, immediately people will ask, you know, how do we scale that? And what I'm really saying is that it's not a scaling approach. It's more to do with being able to see how these patterns of relationship and community building are appearing and how we connect them to each other that really causes emergence to happen. And this is something already happening. There's this growing phenomenon of what I call micro solidarities all over the world, in every part of the world. And we're studying and trying to get in, you know, in a sense, become as aware of as many as we can and bring them into some form of relationship yet to come. So here are at least some of them. We can talk about, transition network. We could talk about the COVID mutual aid groups that grew up in neighborhoods. On the right, we're talking about neighborocracies. This is a huge movement in India, which are all about neighborhood parliaments. Up at the top, you have the cooperative movements. And here in the middle are some of the things that these community agency networks build when they get a chance to work together and see each other and note their multiple forms of agency. So what used to be called simply localism is increasingly what I would call cosmolocalism. Sorry, it's not a term that I invented. We learned that as a term from Michel Bauwens and his peer-to-peer movement, which is incredibly generative, building what we call a global commons of tools and methods that all these community agency networks are now pulling on. So cosmolocalism is the new localism, and that was because of the revolution of the internet, which meant that we can be local and global, effortlessly and connect on those terms. Within all of that, there's this emerging new governance system. There are tools and practices for being able to speak to people across these cans, hear from them, put questions to them, and slowly in certain parts of the world, these are being used to create new governance systems. This one in particular was used in Taiwan, that is now being run as a digital platform, in fact. And here, just to bring the idea of the fractal again to the surface, it is important that there's a feeling of autonomy in each one of these communities that are building themselves, even as they're connecting to others. If these CANs, these community agency networks, connect too soon to the current political system, for example, to get money or to get resources, if they don't, in a sense, have a sense of themselves before they make a relationship with the old political system, there's always a danger that they get hijacked too quickly. So I just want to bring that up really to lay the last part of my proposition here, which is that in order for this eco-civilization to really emerge, I think it needs what I would describe as a parallel polis. We need a space for this burgeoning community of communities to respond in the most human way to the needs of the people in the planet, with as much autonomy as they can, bringing people together and not be hijacked too quickly by the old system. However, I'm not suggesting, as some would, that this would take over the old system and obliterate it. For me, it's more to do with, for the foreseeable future at least, that we develop this parallel ability to be in partnership with the old system, to be able to have relationship with it, to be mutually reinforcing to some extent, and then through soft power to be able to transform from the eco-civilization, be able to transform the old political system as it stands. So that is the longer term vision. And I'm going to stop there because I want to hand over to Karen to add her different perspective to what I think is a very, let's say, friendly vision. We definitely share a lot of our vision, but Karen has a very different way into the same question. And I'd like to hand over. And because I've run out of time, I wonder if, unless there's anything really urgent that anybody would like to ask at this point, I'd like to move into, I don't see any hands. So is that okay for us to move straight on to Karen? And I hope that you've all had a chance to read Karen's biography in the invitation to this event. Karen, you might want to introduce yourself to some extent, but I met Karen first of all on a common project that we were doing for the Leadership for Transition, a European project on the new politics. And Karen has the most incredible pedigree, really, as a professor in the Department of Sociology and Human Geography at the University of Oslo. She's the co-founder of something called Sea Change, which is an initiative that supports transformation in a changing climate. So with 30 years of experience in climate change research, Karen's work uses this integral approach, emphasizing the role of creativity. So I think Karen will go more there than I have done until now, but also she's recently published a book called You Matter More Than You Think, Quantum Social Change for a Thriving World. And Karen's been an incredible inspiration to me, which is why I'd like to hand over to her now. Karen, please do add anything to your own self-introduction that I missed, and over to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Indra, and thanks everybody for showing up today. Yeah, I am speaking to you from Oslo, Norway, where I'm living, and I've been very much inspired by Indra's work and the Alternative UK and Alternative Global, and we've had wonderful conversations over the last few years. And I want to just, I'm going to share some slides and reiterate some of the things that Indra has been talking about, but from a different perspective. And I'm going to ask you to put on the quantum glasses and look at the world through a quantum lens. And instead of thinking of ourselves as just triangles or circles, we can think of ourselves also as waves and particles. So Indra, how much time do I have, just so that we make sure that Pat gets...
Yeah, so Pat's just let me know he's not in a particular hurry. I know that we can go on until 5:30. So I'm just doing my CET rather than BST. So it'd be 5:30 CET, 4:30 our time. So I think you have some space.
Okay, great. Then I will try not to rush it. Can you see my slides there?
Yes, we can see them. Oh, just before you start, Pat, can you just give us a time when you would have to start in order to be able to be ready?
Hold on.
Can't hear you now.
I'm free right up until your stop point.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you.
So,
all right, back to you, Karen.
Okay. So you can see my slides because I can't,
Yeah.
but that's kind of strange. So
I can. Yeah.
Okay, great. So what I want to talk about is this a book and an inquiry that I've been on, referred to as You Matter More Than You Think, Quantum Social Change for a Thriving World. And it really builds on the research I've been doing within the global environmental change community. You know, people are interested in climate change and what it means for the environment and society, and also biodiversity loss and other like global challenges. And one of the big questions that drives my work is, you know, how do we transform ourselves and our societies at the rate, scale, speed, and depth that is called for to meet global challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss? And perhaps more important is, how do we transform in an equitable, ethical, and sustainable manner? Because a lot of people are putting forth ideas right now for these solutions, and not all of them are actually going to be effective. You know, some of them are, you know, they are from the same mindset that created the problem. And so if we really want to answer these questions, I think we have to look at what is that relationship between individual change, collective change, and systems change. And this is what, you know, Indra, you've been talking about in terms of fractal politics and everything. And so for me, you know, when such a complex global issue like climate change, many of us today are feeling like, gosh, do I really matter? You know, can I make a difference? Can I, you know, the things that I do actually influence the larger systems and the structures and things. So that's really led me into looking at paradigms. And paradigms are, you know, our thought patterns that are in, you know, like they influence the scientific methods and things, but they also influence how we organize society. And systems thinker Donella Meadows emphasizes in her, you know, work on leverage points and places to intervene in a system that paradigms are the sources of systems. From them, from shared social agreements about the nature of reality, come systems goals and information flows, feedback, stocks flow, and everything else about systems. So if we are talking about systems change, we want to also be thinking about paradigms. And when we want to talk about a paradigm shift, we want to be thinking, from what to what, and which paradigms have to shift. And so that's really what what I've heard from the in the conversation too, is this, like, our current paradigm really is based on a classical in the Western world, the modern modernization, et cetera, is based on this classical Newtonian Cartesian understanding of the nature of reality, where we draw a line between me and you and us and other and society and environment and humans and natures, and not the least subjects and objects. So we look at the world out there and we kind of separate ourselves from that. And that has had a profound influence. And I think, as Indra had said, that we're deeply divided by design, and that design is, clearly part of that paradigm. And what that has resulted in is a fragmented world, a broken world, a world of polarization, a world of really where, we're just not actually maintaining anything that is consistent with a whole. And physicist David Bohm, warned us of this decades ago. He said, what is primarily needed is a growing realization of the extremely great danger of going on with a fragmentary process of thoughts. And this idea that our thoughts are actually fragmented, and that creates a world that is fragmented, is something worth thinking. And for me, working in Earth system science and global change research, it's been very fascinating for me to think, like, okay, well, what are the alternatives to this classical Newtonian worldview? And I think, over more than 100 years ago, quantum physicists started to question that nature of reality and the atomistic, reductionist, deterministic, worldview that has dominated. And quantum, as this quote says, quantum mechanics force physicists to reshape their ideas of reality, to rethink the nature of things at the deepest level, and to revise their concepts of position and speed, as well as their notions of cause and effect. And this is, more than 100 years ago. And, they're saying, like, wow, this is, reality is not what it seems at the subatomic level. And so what does that have to mean? We have this idea of a wave-particle duality, that we are both waves and particles until the observer makes a measurement or observation on it, so that we start to see that, like, we are just like vibrations of energy. We understand complementarity, that you can be in two states at once, and that really moves us from the either or to the both and world, where we are both waves and particles. And going into what Indra was talking about with in terms of that local global and everything, is like, we can be both. And yet when we take a measurement, you are an I, or you have more of a feeling of an I and a we, but they are both superimposed. And importantly, non-local entanglement is a critical part. And this is what Einstein referred to as spooky action at a distance, but there's nothing with direct causation in it. It's when like that you get information about a separated particle when you make a measurement on one. So all of these things are showing us that reality is not what it seems. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And how do we navigate that world of uncertainty when we want to be very certain, like, oh, we want to know exactly where we're moving to and how we're going. And so that potentiality that exists in that quantum world, how do we translate that into our social world? And so for me, a driving question has been not just is reality is not what it seems, but what if social reality is not what it seems? What if we are underestimating our collective capacity for social change by actually reducing ourselves to these individuals, or consolidating ourselves just to a we, and that, how do we actually realize the potential for social change that exists right here and right now? And for me, climate change is my entry point. I've been doing research on that since 1988, and I'm I feel that, like, it's it's an issue that used to be just kind of like, oh, this is a future problem, and we see it right here, right now, and we see that it affects many people unequally, and the justice dimensions, the equity dimensions, and the political dimensions are profound. So can insights from quantum physics and quantum social science inspire transformations that are not only rapid and effective, but equitable, ethical, and sustainable? So that's my question. And the book really had me looking into like, okay, what does quantum social change actually mean? And I think to me, it describes a conscious, nonlinear, and non-local approach to transformations that are grounded in our inherent oneness, that recognizes our entanglement through language, through meaning, through shared context, and that really shows that, the potential of our intentions to actually create a world where all life can thrive. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the, ideas in this book. I should mention that all of the artwork was a collaboration with Norwegian artist Tone Bjordam, and that in itself was a different way of expressing this type of entanglement that words and academic blah 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 doesn't always capture. So that's what you'll be seeing. But the part of it that I want to get across is, when I say you matter more than you think, it's matter not in terms just as being significant, but also as being substantial. So matter as that kind of thing, but also matter as a meaning. And the starting point for this inquiry, and I think for a lot of the work that why and alternative politics is so important right now is because we are in the decade that matters, and this decade matters. We know from science that we have less than 10 years to bend the curves on greenhouse gas emissions, to start to reach the sustainable development goals and the Agenda 2030 and so on. And here we are in 2022, and we seem to be moving in the opposite direction. So I kind of go through, some of those reasons for why it's a really good time to challenge the way we've been thinking about ourselves and our relation to nature and the world. And then that brings us into paradigms of, why paradigms matter in terms of, like if we are being governed by a paradigm of separation, we are clearly not on the, not likely to see many changes in the coming year. So how do we move to a paradigm that is resonant with indigenous knowledge, with wisdom traditions, with ideas that that many of us have, that know deep down that we are not separate, we are not one. I was just reading today an article in the New York Times that was remembering Friedrich Schiller in the late 1700s, saying that we are nature, we are one with nature. And so the paradigms that can get us there, I think, quantum mechanics and quantum social science that is emerging for that is telling us very different things about the nature of society. And to me, it's really exciting. And as part of that, we have to really look at how beliefs matter, because beliefs form our, how we show up in the world, what we see. We tend to not, we can say, like we believe what we see, but it's also that we see what we believe. We, our frames of reference have filters, they have blind spots. And when we're talking about climate change, a lot of people are like, do you believe in climate change or do you not believe in climate change? And as a scientist, we want to say, how do you understand climate change? But a much more, I think, impactful belief that is having a profound consequences is when people say, I don't believe I matter. And that lack of a sense of agency, I think it penetrates everything, and it kind of perpetuates this business as usual way of going about things. So if we move over, to a to relationships and look at relationships matter from a relational perspective, like how do we see the world? How do we relate to the world? And when I'm thinking about relationships, you can think about the very us versus other and things in space, the whole paradigm that has really driven modernity and progress over the last 200 years is this idea that that we can just exploit, we can we can do whatever we want to the world, but it is separate and out there. That's very different from what quantum physics is telling us, that we live in an entangled universe, that there's nothing that is separate. And going back to, the conversation we had with Indra, we don't actually have the language, especially in English, to communicate those types of relationships. It's, we're very much in, subjects and objects, and we, you can look to indigenous languages, or many other languages do have them, but we do not have the words for the I-we relationship that we're talking about, for the whole parts relationships that we're talking about. And even just, both and is not in that sense. So how do we actually move forward? And this is, where it's not, you might just go roll your eyes and say, oh, quantum this, quantum that. We don't need that. But a key point is that our language that we use, the metaphors that we use, actually do make a difference. And everything in science is actually a metaphor, the greenhouse effect and tipping points and things, our language of science is very metaphorical. And so how do we use different metaphors to make that, quantum leap to sustainability, and think differently about our, entanglement and superpositions, etc. And so from there, from talking about metaphors, and also, that they create resonance with images and pictures in our head, and that they really, like our language is really very much entangled. And that's where, looking at why entanglement matters, it's more than just a metaphor. It is the basic nature of reality at the subatomic scale. And quantum social science is saying it's not just at the subatomic scale. And, science itself is showing that proteins can be entangled, but social science is saying we are entangled through language and through meaning making. There's like all possibilities exist until we collapse a reality through speech acts, through words, through what we say, through what we do. So there's the entanglement of us through our conversations, through our language, and through like our core essence of our, the universal values that we hold, whether it's equity, whether it's dignity, whether it's compassion, the values that apply to all people, all species, etc. And that, I think, brings us into, like that role of, like consciousness, and being aware that, we are not just separated, that consciousness matters, especially if we want to make deliberate transformations to sustainability, deliberate political changes. You'd actually need to have like some sense of awareness of consciousness and of social consciousness, because not all, like that, we can to think about like who has agency. And panpsychism is a theory that agency goes all the way down, and many scientists are saying that. But in the research that I do, consciousness is often just ignored, as it is by many physical scientists. It's just epiphenomenal, when others say it is fundamental. So what if we include the noosphere, or our shared thoughts and meaning in our studies? That would be something very different. And that brings us to Indra's, like main point about agency, and why agency matters is because these changes will not take place just by wishful thinking or by hope, but it really calls for actions. It calls for the doing as well as the being. And that's another, like how do we navigate that space? And when I think about agency, it's like, it's not just human agency, but it's, you can, people are talking about non-human agency as well. But agency is never neutral, and agency alone has often created many of the problems that we're experiencing right now. So how do we actually foster a quality of agency that is based on these values that apply to all, that are based on this this idea that us and other are not separate, that that it's like the circle of care of, who are we including in our world, whether it's people in other parts of the world or generations yet to come. How do you actually build that quality of agency? And I think to do that, we really need to be thinking about patterns, and that's where fractals come in, and why and the fractals part really was an addition to the book after some, great discussions with Indra and listening to her about fractal politics and talking to people about urban fractals and that, these self-similar patterns that repeat at all scales. They're not like cookie cutters. They are context specific. They emerge in terms of, in nature, it's mathematics, algebra, and in nature, but social fractals come with values. They come through, who we are and how we show up every moment. And so going beyond this like top down, bottom up, or local global to what Indra refers to as the, cosmolocal, and, from a fractal perspective that, we're always influencing all of, many different spheres, and our actions are scaling through shared meaning. We are quantum social fractals that are shared, our shared meaning and our entanglement is actually having an impact more than we think. And so often we just kind of think, oh, do I make a difference? And we're looking for the numbers and the actual feedback, but we're part of a much larger conversation going on. And I think it's really important to remember that and know that like the things that we're doing here are going on everywhere. And that brings me then to, I'm wrapping up so we can get to Pat before he has to go off, but I know I'm going very fast, but the heart of this really is that you matter, and you matter as this part of an I and we, and part of a whole part of an entangled social organism, as I call it, and to really recognize that, and to recognize that it's like that what we do right here and now as a process, as a fractal that that is activating now and now and now and now, that our impacts can be enormous. And so rather than just thinking of like, oh, little me or little Norway or little whatever, we can start to see like, wow, we are part of an emerging fractal pattern, a generative pattern, as David Bohm wrote about. And so with that, the work I do on transformations to sustainability is looking at how we create those fractals through what I refer to as the 3 spheres of transformation, which are really, the practical, the political, and the personal. And that political is in the center there because that's how we collectively organize society. But if our paradigm is still seeing some people as expendable, some people as disposable, some species as not important, etc., we're likely to create a world that is exactly like the one we're seeing right now. And so how do we actually think about scaling in that kind of more spiral manner where the individual and family and friends and personal network, we start to see that we are all of the above. We're all of these, and including at the highest level, beyond global, to all Homo sapiens who have ever lived. And you can say like we are part of just this one larger whole. So when I'm thinking about this, I think that, like that the essence of this really is the politics that Indra is describing in her book, The Politics of Waking Up. It's like, how do we wake up to this idea that we are actually having a fingerprint on the future, that we are actually connected, and we are, we're actually like leaving our traces every moment, and that the, the way we show up, the way we actually engage with, ourselves and others. So coming at climate change as a relationship issue of how do I relate to myself, to others, to the environment, to systems, to the future, and to change itself, I think gets to a very different approach to thinking about how we respond to issues like climate change. So I really appreciate every week getting my alternative newsletter and seeing how this actually plays out in the real world, because people are always asking me, show me this in the real world. And I say, go to Indra, so among others. So I'll stop the sharing right there. And and then we can pass it on to Pat.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. And I hope, that I could feel again that wave of appreciation for the way that you are describing this, which I know speaks to a different audience again. But really makes me feel so much more powerful just to listen, because so often politics feels like a mundane thing, to take something on and to change it and to improve it and to include more people. And it's very easy to lose sight of the much bigger impact, that your actions are having within a new paradigm. you know, of understanding what power is, understanding how transformation happens. It's that shift, you know, of belief, as you rightly say, you know, and people think they're doing something much more than they could have believed before. It gives so much energy. It literally gives energy to the system. Before I move on to Pat, even which I should do actually, because you set him up so perfectly for the thing that he's going to describe. But I feel we should just quickly invite any questions directly to Karen. Violetta, I don't know if you want to respond immediately, or
I can wait if Pat is on a time schedule. Then let's listen to Pat as well, and then we'll do collective questioning. If Karen, that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Really, it was great.
Thank you. And Pat, can I see you? I'm not sure I can.
Yes, I'm here. Can you see
there
me?
you are.
Hi.
Not for once in the room next door, but some other part.
No, I know.
of the
Yeah,
UK.
I know. Next to the laundry.
Yeah. And just to introduce Pat, who's the co-initiator of the Alternative Global, as it is now, also has been a performer and a musician for over 30 years, maybe it's more, Pat, and all over that time also a writer and the author of a book called The Play Ethic. You might want to bring that in yourself, Pat. And a journalist and a founder of media platforms. So Pat has been instrumental in working in all the major newspaper titles, but also the founder of a platform in Scotland, not a platform, but a newspaper, the Sunday Herald, and now the founder of the Daily Alternative newsletter that Karen just brought. And Pat, I hope you were able to hear most of what Karen was talking about, because it does feel like a very appropriate way into the work that you do with the alternative. So over to you.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for having me. And I immediately build. Can you hear me all okay? Yes, wave if you can hear me properly.
Yes.
Okay. I'd sort of like to immediately respond to many of the things that Karen was saying, because I mean, as Indra had said, I'm a sort of long-standing conventional journalist as well as a musician. And, you know, conventional journalism operates on a kind of Cartesian basis, right? Here we are, there's the facts, it's our job to report them. And I'm going to add quantum physics to what I know from cognitive science, which is the whole idea that you believe, you don't just see what you believe, as you said, Karen, you believe what you see. And so the question about how to engage people emotionally and in terms of their affect and their emotion is a question that's sort of rising up in journalism. So that's very pertinent to me, and I'm going to go away and think about that a lot. But I think what I wanted to sort of help to amplify today was the question of how media relates to these kinds of new paradigm behaviors and practices, and what practically do you try and do with the tools that are to hand? I'm certainly not a coder. I'm a manipulator of templates, Squarespace to be specific, for their daily alternative site. But I'm sort of acutely self-consciously aware, and I think we've had about sort of 30 years of media studies in universities and schools to kind of reinforce this fact that people know that media is a construction of reality. And they know, but they're also beginning to know that doesn't mean to say that facts aren't important, but the question of how those facts are constructed and who constructs them and what those facts reveal is very, very important. I mean, mind share is incredibly important. Framing and priming, as the kind of political psychologists call it, is very important. And so I think one of the things that I've been able to help Indra with the alternative is to sort of know how a news story operates or an opinion piece operates, but to kind of put it within a different framework. So rather than it being in a kind of a position of spurious objectivity, you know, the alternative the daily alternative or the alternative weekly is planet friendly. I mean, we're interested. We are gripped by the existential crisis of climate catastrophe. So, and we're actually, that's one of the things I would say journalistically that maybe is one of the first things to say that's quite specific, is that we specifically define our daily stories by existential crises, which is climate change, but also technology, and also other sort of factors. But we define what counts as a story by the degree to which it helps people to understand or to act creatively and positively in the face of these existential crises. So we make that quite clear, and the editorial sort of works on that basis. I'm going to kind of show you something of what I'm talking about. And the other thing just to say about this is that one of the things that's been interesting over the last 5 years is to figure out how to do this sustainably. And this is a real testament to the internet age that Indra has been talking about, because I mean, most of my stories come from me walking through the streets and someone sending me a tweet out of my peers, which I then stop at the bus stop, save, and then take back home and turn into a blog post. So there's a kind of, I mean, that was a dream that I would have had as a child, which many sort of science fiction books would have talked about, the world computer, the world of communication, the idea that we have access to each other in multiple ways. That was a dream through most of my science fiction childhood, Star Trek, Star Wars, and all the rest of it. And now the dream is sort of reality. And I think we're constantly, and it's not dissimilar to what Karen is saying about an idea of reality that is interpenetrable, is fluid and field-like. That's not just a set of concepts. That's us being surprised by a piece of media or a meme as we walk through the streets with our devices. You know, so there's a sort of empirical reality to the fact that we are in this surprising, constantly challenging age that is not the 19th century newspaper, but the 21st century device in our hand. And I think that the landscape of news media has changed incredibly. But it's also an activist age. So again, before I show you what I've been doing, the question is, how do you get a media that serves a kind of an activism or a sense of purpose or a motivated community? And how do you build that in a way that's coherent and effective? So I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm not a very good Zoomer, I have to be honest. But anyway, here we are. I'll share this, which is to show you, which I'll try and sort of go through the bits of the site that might be interesting or that you might wish to take inspiration from. And we'll leave this fabulous front page for the moment because I want to talk about that a wee bit later on, and Indra will help me. But let me just go to the daily alternatives. So there it is. It's the daily alternative. You know, you break down the word journalism, it means something every day. We almost do epochism rather than journalism, or themism rather than journalism. But anyway, that's what you would call a newspaper, is the daily alternative. So it's the idea that every day there's a tool or a tip or a trick or an insight that will help you make a difference, change the world. We have a news aspect to that, which again, the Squarespace platform makes really possible. I mean, and this is just, I think this is just the first, I think this is 2 weeks of podcasting, 2 weeks of posting. And it's maybe just to give you an idea of how we are thinking about news and opinion in the context of trying to answer existential crises like climate and technology. So we have an alternative editorial there, which Indra mostly writes, but sometimes I write. Next to that is a story about a project that helps to identify words that describe relationships between humans and nature that have not been properly described. Now, I love the fact that I think that's a news story. I also love the fact that that's next to an item which is about digital organizations organizing themselves in a fun, funky, and collective way. Then you go, the next post or the next bit in the newsletter is a very, very practical story about a community centre in Glasgow that has made all the design competitions for its ambition and its design and its look. But it took 20 years of struggle and a 55-day occupation to make it happen. Next to that, as you can see from the animation, is a series of inspiring videos. Next to that is a intellectual discussion, conceptual discussion about growth versus degrowth. Next to that is a piece about quiet quitting, which is one part of this whole great resignation phenomenon, post-COVID phenomenon of people redefining and rethinking about their work. Next to that is how can AI become a machinery of the commons. So that's for us, that's a week of news. And so what is the kind of coherent theme around that would seem to be a perversely heterogeneous set of elements? Well, partly it's partly because I was very, very keen from the start of this to ensure that and Indra and I did this jointly, to create a taxonomy of the news. I'm sure you know what I mean by a taxonomy, but a list of concepts that would be a self-consciously made grid whereby we would filter and choose the news. And I'll kind of show you it here, so we have something. We use the sort of the categories and tags. And this isn't a genius wizard wheeze. This is something that's been happening since the beginning of the web, but it's something that if you pay attention to it, it reaps incredible rewards later on. The Guardian is a great example of someone that's been tagging from the beginnings of their website. And what you find with the Guardian is that there's an extraordinary archive under each category or tag that you could literally send to people, and it's like a research exercise. So I thought if we keep doing this, we will create this incredibly motivating archive of concepts, which, behind every single one of these concepts is about 100 or 200 articles around that theme. I mean, I'm just going to I'll just pick artists, for example. And there you have, a full archive that goes on and on and on and on and on about how artists are helping to socially imagine the world. You can go to another one. Let me think. Democratic innovation. So there you have a whole tranche of things that have been picked up about how to innovate democratic and participative and consultative structures. And I often, when people come to us for help, often the easiest thing to do is to take the category and send them the archive and say, work your way through this. And what that does is to give them something to work with, but it also shows them that they're not alone. It shows them that they are on a terrain or on a plateau of similar activities that have been popping up all over UK, Europe, and the world. And it's a matter of being diligent over month after month, year after year. But if you are diligent month after month, year after year, the kind of editorial, the kind of spirit of surprise that makes up a great editorial or a great curatorial space, which is something that you want to do for people. You want them to be constantly stimulated. But what that can be in the service of is the plurality of a movement or the plurality of a set of perspectives. And that's maybe a wee bit of an example of something that's quite simple, but if you're diligent about it and you're rigorous about it and you keep thinking about the underlying concepts, the beliefs that help you see something rather than the seeing that makes you believe, it can be a powerful, it'd be simply assembled, but in the end, it's sort of a powerful resource. Before I move on to the front bit again, and maybe Indra can sort of help me at that point, we have been thinking about forms of media that can address the distortions of the existing media a lot. We've produced white papers, we've gone for funding, we haven't been terribly successful. But there's one downside of it, which is that the forces of the established media are so powerful that it seems crazy to even try. And again, this is very much echoing with what Karen is saying about, do my actions matter? One of the great things about saying to a cosmolocal community, have you thought about creating your own cosmolocal media, is that it does provide agency. I mean, the tools are there. Everybody's a verbal communicational creature. Everybody has a variety of skills that can serve the locality's media system. And it does make you feel as if you're making a mark upon the world and that's one of the underestimated powers of the internet, is it certainly it gives you agency because you feel you can create your own media. Okay, I don't want to talk for very much longer, and I'd be happy to answer questions about some of these challenges. But Indra, do you want to? Shall I click from? Do you want to sort of describe what Planet A is, and then I'll click through to the
Yeah. So just leave it there for a second.
Yeah.
So basically, what Planet A appeared in our consciousness, if you like, when we were thinking about our 5th year. And after 5 years of doing this work, so what Pat's describing, when we are doing the systems convening of watching everything emerging, then Pat has been the editor of the newsletter, sharing with our audience and causing them to interconnect with each other all the different aspects of this I-we world, so they might be to do with personal development, they might be to do with communities emerging, it might be to do with impact on the planet, and all the things in between that would reflect what Karen was describing as adding up to this paradigm shift, in so many forms. So what we hope we've been doing, as Pat was saying, is occupying the future in a way, showing people what is already taking as green shoots for the future. And then after 5 years of doing this, we thought to ourselves, well, what can we, is there anything that we're not doing that, or should we just carry on doing this, infinitely? And then we thought, no, let's take an existential leap, actually, of imagination, and try to locate all of these green shoots in a place where, if you think you can see all of these green shoots appearing, and you can be in that mindset and participate in that consciousness, then let's describe that as standing on planet A, right? So it's a very different idea than, for example, Elon Musk has when he says, we need to shift to Mars, we need to go somewhere else and start again. We're saying we can rebirth the planet without moving at all, simply by shifting our mindset. And here is this new planet that we think we are already standing on, that we're calling it Planet A, and it already has all of these green shoots, which are the sign that this new future is coming. So Pat, if you just want to click on it, we can show. Just go on to the present. We can show that, just as categories, if you like, of things arising that we already know are present for those of us who can sense we're living on planet A. So let's start with the iPlanetarian. If you just have a quick look, so you go there, and you can see that in this illustration, it brings together what is happening from an individual perspective, and all of this leads to the articles that Pat has so carefully taxonomized. We can read about the emotional needs and resources, or read about the integral growth, or read about the new practices, and then there's the articles that are connected to all of those things. So that's the I perspective, if you like. If you want to go back to the planet, Pat. Yeah, so that's looking at it from that perspective. But if you look at it from the we perspective, you could go to, of course, the cans. Yes, we can planet. Here are all the community agency networks that we're describing are already appearing. And it's really how we connect them to each other, or how we develop the mindset of cosmolocalism. Where somewhere near me, how can I start this? How can I prototype it? There's articles on all of these things. And very importantly, they are feeding in. Not only are they there for us to observe, but they are actually giving us their information all the time. So as we are putting them on the map, they are also feeding us their information. So the new media system that that we are designing and that Pat is editing at the moment is a two-way system where we are identifying this planet A as the source of news. So now planet A becomes the source of our news media. We report on it so that we can reflect back to people the good things that are going on, not simply the stuff that we know is mostly about how we're breaking down. Yeah. So, yeah, do you want to go back, Pat? Oh, sorry, I'll come back to that in a second. Have a look at the regen economies quickly. So one thing we didn't emphasize very much, that all of these community agency networks are actually giving rise to new kinds of economy. So it's not as if we are obliged to take part in the old one that is now crumbling. There are new forms of economy that are arising directly from this new, the eco-civilization that we are pointing at. Thank you. Yeah, the Wellbeing Economy, Wellbeing Alliance. And then serving all of that are the new social politics that are slowly arising. So in this area, we're looking at new structures, new culture, the parallel polis, what does that actually mean? And, in each case, it's reconnected to all these different articles that have been taxonomized over the last 5 years and will carry on being so. And then the action button in each of these is what you could do next, gives you a clue as to what you could do next to be part of all of this. And then there's another bubble there, which I'd like to draw attention to, which is the new energy sources. And this really speaks a lot to what Karen was talking about, that, what is it that we consider to be energy? What is the paradigm of the new energy sources? And it isn't simply it's no longer what can we extract from the ground, but it's also not simply what do we gain from the atmosphere, the sun, the wind, and so on. It's also the energy source that comes from that, Pat, yes, the soft power. It comes from the ability to tell the story in a new way, to be able to narrate the current reality in new ways. There's the energy arising from what we call the creation of value, if you just want to click on that, which is about new forms of value. So if we think we already know what constitutes value, when you're working with people who've always been marginalized or excluded, and you hear from them what they are valuing and what is needed, then you're really creating new forms of value all the time that are bringing energy to your system that you didn't have before. We could become quite unrecognizable as a society if we really brought all of this kind of intelligence on board. So just finally go back, and then, just to say that the alternative media system, if you just go back there for a second, it's not only, so at the moment, what we have with the alternative media system is this weekly newsletter made up of daily blogs, but it's also all of the Zoom room activities that we do, and the videos that we produce, and the conversations that can be had globally. This very thing that we're doing now is part of the new media system, because not only are we, inviting teachers, but we're inviting everybody else's response to that, and they bring their creativity, and every single thing is generated through the relationships that are being formed every minute of every moment of every day. So the power and potential is, in a sense, captured in this new media system to tell a new story about this present moment. And I think you can come out of it now, Pat. And to be doing this assiduously is incredibly important. That it's not just a new title. It's not just that we are giving a new set of opinions. We're generating a new media system that can connect with all of these community agency networks and new kinds of forms of all kinds, that together will generate this new story about us, story about the people, story about the planet, that when we begin to develop it more and make it more attractive to people, remembering always that we are trying to make it more attractive to people who don't care about whether, you know, the planet survives or not. That's really, in a sense, our holy grail. When we can do that, you know, to go along with everything that Karen was saying, you know, we're really generating a new reality. So I really invite, you know, all of you to take part in that, to sign up to that, but to contribute to it, to really send us your stuff, tell us what you're doing, so that we can share it with others, and you can meet the others who are doing the stuff that you care about and that you love. So Pat, I just want to let you close then. What do you think is the future of the media system that you've been slowly developing over the last 5 years?
Well, I think one of the ways in which it will have a future is if we can both find a way to use certain technologies so that people can invest in that media to make it viable, so that they become conscious of the pie chart of their media spend, and we can find ways to get them to consciously spend it on media that is helping them to be good planetary citizens, because lots of people want to be that. It's not as if there's no demand. And I mean, one of the things I would anticipate is that at some point the penny will drop with the big media organizations, and we'll see a newspaper that's as it is in relation to sustainability and the climate crisis as the Financial Times is to money, or as the New Scientist is to science. I absolutely predict that someone will get that together. So, and I would like, and before that happens, and whether that happens badly or not, I would like philanthropic organizations to realize how important the constructing alternative media systems are, because it really is a battle for hearts and minds out there. You know, powerful narratives, even myths, are consciously constructed by vested interests who don't want things to change. And so it's incredibly important that the resources that are on the other side of that are being devoted to thinking about how to engage people, not just cognitively, but also emotionally, and give them stories that enable them to be empowered and act. There's a thing in the US called solutions journalism or constructive journalism, which I constantly keep in my mind all the time. And, you know, they are running around American newsrooms saying, you know, you can have better reader engagement. You might even improve your product if you begin the story of a ghetto, not with a child, you know, shooting up in the alleyway, but with another child deciding to become a great student and working through the resources. That's a choice. You can begin your story. The ways that you begin and develop your narratives is constantly a choice. You make choices about the reality that you think is important. So I would like, we've been prototyping this.
Could you just stop sharing, Pat, so I can see you?
Sorry.
Stop sharing.
We've been prototyping this under very small resources, but it also means that we're very free to do and choose what we want to do. We don't have anybody standing over our shoulders, and we're able to iterate a field of possibilities and a set of new priorities for stories and new priorities for opinion and framing, which, you know, we're going to keep going until people recognize that this can scale, and that this is a model that can be applied elsewhere. But I think what we would love to happen is it to happen at the local, cosmo-local level, and then, but also for someone to sort of look at the power of prevailing platforms and say, we need a different kind of platform. How do we build that? And I think we've got a lot to bring about how you would construct a new common sense for these new kinds of media. What are the rules of thumb that you don't you don't habitually use. And here are some rules of thumb that you should use. You know, you should be thinking, you should be putting stories about community purpose next to stories about how to seize your mind, because the two things are connected. The two things are absolutely, you should be putting stories in about, you know, criticizing the controlling aspects of artificial intelligence alongside a bunch of Belarusian Free State artists who hold a dinner every fortnight and do their politics that way. To bring these things together is what traditional media doesn't do, but if you have the freedom to do it, you should do it with your alternative media. And in doing so, you dream catch. It's like a dream catcher approach. You basically catch the dreams, lay it out as a media product. And I would love to do it to just 5x, 10x times more powerfully than we are doing it. But the fact that we are doing it is enough of an exemplar for maybe other people in the room to do it themselves.
Thank you very much. And that's obviously a very fractal approach to the future.
If you say so, Indra.
I do. So that is, and I think Karen does as well. So that's really the overview, probably a lot more than is in my book, you know, really. So I'm very grateful to have a chance to connect what I was writing about in my book to the great work of what Karen is doing and what Pat is doing as well, because none of what I'm thinking about as a new political approach will work without these other two ways of looking. And then there are others as well. But over to you, maybe Violetta, you would like to say whatever it is for any questions or any further discussion. I'm really curious to be in your responses.
Certainly, thank you very much. It was very mind-blowing moments, the whole 2 hours, and all the comments and possibilities that we actually have. It's great to get many confirmations and many new statements that are opening up new doors for even broader thinking. So I'm deeply grateful to all three of you. So while we're waiting maybe for somebody to raise some questions, I would just like to ask you all this fragmented, fractal approach to network building. And while you were all talking, I kind of tried to move my body away from all the structures I know so far and feel it. You know, how would it be just to surrender to the field of energy and be a confident fractal in this field, and then just connecting based on really the level of consciousness or awareness, and just trust the space that we together are moving towards something new and fresh. How do you see the emergence of this new type of network? Where do you see it? Where do you feel it with your own actions? How do you position yourself within that system?
Karen, do you want to start, or I'm happy to? Do you want to have a go?
If you want to start first, I'll catch my thoughts.
Okay. So for me, it's almost like it's not so much that I have to build anything, but it's really how I look at what I'm already in. So it's really a new way of looking at what is, to be able to notice what I'm including and what I'm excluding from the system that I feel I'm operating in. And then to ask the question, where does my agency actually lie? Right. So I am, or any one of us are at any given time in a system that's working for us in a particular way, but we have to ask ourselves, am I aware of how that system is working for me? And in what way am I simply living outside my own system and making it wrong, right? So to be only making it wrong is in a way that will color your way of being alive and being in this world and how you matter or whether you don't matter. Or if you re-see it in a way that you can put yourself back in the center of something and be able to activate the things around you, will give rise to a more hopeful future. So in my own work, I do that in a number of different ways. So I would, for example, work with the alternative within this media approach. I also work with a number of CANs, community agency networks, simply by immersing myself in them. I don't lead them, I don't prototype them, I'm just part of them, and notice what's growing in those. But I also work at the new economy level. So I have a group of people around me who are simply interested in what are the new economies that are going to regenerate our system that helps to go more holistic. And that happens to be my group is called Bounce Beyond, and it's just a group of initiators in the new economy field who are trying to identify what a transformative economy would look like. So it's like, pick your thing, pick the thing that you would want to give energy to, and then see how it gathers around you and how you're looking at it and how you feel that you can generate agency. If there are things missing, really obviously, then you bring them in. I'm missing at this, I'm missing at that, or I didn't really notice that thing that is here that I'm not appreciating. And maybe if I start to appreciate it in a new way, it will give more energy to the system. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's almost like a new spiritual practice, but it's very practical as well. I mean, none of the people I work with are distinctly spiritual in those three realms I've just described. Although I also have a spiritual circle as well.
Could I also add a comment, Violeta?
Go
Okay.
ahead, Karen.
Thank you so much for your question.
Sava, just
Yes.
Karen was getting ready to reply.
Yes,
Yeah?
for sure. Please go ahead, Karen.
Okay.
Oh, I was just I could just to follow up on what Indra was just saying. Like, I think fractal approaches for me are less about network building, but more of a practice, and recognizing that we already we are already connected, we are entangled. But how do you recognize that people who are in that third cloud of yours, Indra, the ones who don't care about others' environment, how do you connect with that you are connected, and how do you, in that practice, open that space where you can actually get to a conversation about caring about what matters and the same things to them. And so for me, like the fractal, whether I'm working, is something with my family, with students, or with like an international assessment, it's like, wow, how do I show up at this scale? How do I do it so that it replicates all the way down to someone else's family, or all the way up to someone else's whatever organization? So yeah, so sorry, Saba.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And your question really, Violeta, actually covered up all the conversation. It was a really great and profound question. In my opinion, when we change our paradigm from mechanical view, or it is better to say that from Newtonian view to the quantum view and energy view, there is a shift in our mindset that, for example, scientifically speaking, and I am holding the field, unbelievable amounts of field that have been manifested through electrons, that right now I am holding this field in this figure, which is called Sabo. And you are exactly holding that field as the figure and shape of Violeta. We all are holding the same field, which is called the universal field. From this perspective, we can say that we are all connected to each other, and it is completely scientific. Actually, I cannot say it is spirituality. And actually, we have to change our paradigm, scientific paradigm, to this view. And in my opinion, success is not about belonging to a system or belonging to one type of seeing the universe. In my opinion, success is more about the balance between, for example, the masculine energy, between the feminine energy, between mindset, between spirituality, between reality, between 3D reality, between strategy, between planning. we have to have this kind of balance in any kind of area that we are living life. That's the meaning, actually, the true meaning of success, in my opinion. And about the fractal question, as a scientist, for example, seeing the experiment about the lights that was bombing through a very linear hole, when there was an observer, the light showed the properties of materiality. And when there is not any observer, it showed the property of wave. That's why we can conclude that how we are seeing the object is changing the awareness of that structure. Are we seeing the universe from the perspective of compassion, love, joy, happiness, cooperation, civilization, or we are seeing the universe through the glance of judgment, hate, or any other negative feelings? That's how we are affecting the universe through our perspectives and through our intention. Because when you look at the universe through the wave properties, that's how we can shape ourselves, and we can say that scientifically we are all connected. And this means the meaning of fractal life, that it can amplify through bigger and bigger perspectives and through bigger and bigger dimensions with the first seed that we put into our intention. It is my opinion.
Thank you. Pat, I think you wanted to come in there.
Yeah. No, that's all really strongly taken. The only thing I was going to say from my own expertise is that, Violetta, how do you identify that you're in a kind of fractal emergent situation? I wrote a big book on play, and I think one of the interesting things about when a situation is playful, or when there is playfulness in the situation, that's often an indicator, if you read from evolutionary theory, that when animals start to play, they're feeling safe. It's about safe, it's about learning, educational risk. You're learning from taking experiments, but you're fundamentally anchored in the world, or feeling safe and cared for in the world, and then you play. So I think there's something, and play is a very interesting word. I just give this to you. Hopefully it's interesting, because it's also about agency. I play, I'm a player, but it's also about being played with, about being part of the processes of the universe. It's a very, very protean, amorphous, field-like word. But we kind of know play when we see it, because play is sort of tied to freedom. So when an organism is sort of acting freely, then it's usually, and enjoyably, then it's usually in play. And I think that's an indicator that we're in a very healthy system, or ecosystem, or human system. And it's by far, is it not just confined to children? It's a sort of an adult. There are forms of adult play, obviously, but I think that's maybe an indicator for what you're looking for. Something when things are getting playful, things are probably getting fractal.
That's great, because when I used to be a consultant and we were building these business models and strategies, they always had to sing back. That's how I knew that they were good. As long as if they didn't sing back, we said, no, keep going, no matter how look it looked.
That's great.
Very good. You reminded me of that. Thank you. Ferial has one comment.
Yes.
I have a little comment, but I also have a question. So my first comment is, or my one comment is actually, I really loved what Saba had shared and how she brought that into it, because I just want to make it practical, like in my own life, really, in the sense that I see an apple tree produces apples. It doesn't produce oranges, and so when I personally made that connection between going inwards for myself, then what Indra described as in all the other things. So I focused in on I, yes. But then when the I and focusing in there allowed me to understand my we, and then all of it just started happening naturally. If I'm an apple tree, I wasn't producing oranges. I started producing after where my intentionality went. And so with that, there was this profound thing that one of you said, well, I think two of you said it, we believe what we see and we see what we believe. So I think when you set your own personal intention, that, like Saba suggested, it spreads out to become what we can then affect in the world. So I have a question for Pat, and that is, the media is an important part of this whole picture. And so I'm all about practical, and I want to find out, how do we, is there an opportunity to use the alternative in the sense of building that next layer? I heard you saying that this was an experiment, right? But now maybe that next layer, is it about connecting with something like eco-civilization? They're already having all these talks, all these things, and saying, right, let's put some of that information in here, connecting with places like Violetta, myself, and some others work with an organization called Social Systems Labs. They're creating technologies and all kinds of things. And we can mention a few others. Is this now that opportunity, I'm asking, where we start to negotiate and start to say, how do we bring some of that in here and use that facility to reach not just the people in this room, like you said earlier, we're the usual the usuals, but how do we reach out there?
Sure. I'll happily pass over to Indra quite quickly on this, because she's doing an awful lot of weaving together of tech and software interest that comes to the alternative. And I think there's a possibility for it to sort of piece itself together. I mean, we are constantly talking to people who think that they have the magic key or the magic code, or the protocol, or the kind of the set of agreements, and everybody thinks, lots of people think that they have them themselves. So I think there's almost like I would almost call it like a constitutional moment, or like a constitutional convention, or a convention of some kind. And maybe we need to be doing more convening of bringing people who maybe need to certainly pull their technical talents together and their strategic talents together, and think about how work can be concentrated rather than duplicated. But that's not going to come out from, I mean, the classic example of how that happens is Linus Torvalds in a Finnish university dumping Linux on the world, and then the world takes it up. I mean, that's probably not the model. But I think convening the talents and convening the skills and the expertise, and doing both trying to create different networks that are designed to have different outcomes, and also have strategies for existing networks. Some people can do amazing things on TikTok, just to kind of convey something with power and emotion and cognition and really land it with people. So there's both a kind of, what do we build that works for us, and then there's a, how do we use what's still to some degree an open system for our benefit. So I don't know if that answers it, but Andrew, you maybe want to talk about the people who you talk with.
I tell you what I'm just going to do in a very tantalizing way. I'm going to flash at you a diagram, Ferial, and then we can pick it up afterwards, okay? So here's my little flash. Let's start with this one. That is a new media system that we've been designing. And yes, you definitely should be part of it, for sure. It looks a bit like this more. This is the same system, but in a slightly different way of describing. The thing that holds the space for complex human beings, the tools and practices, the CANs, the community agency networks, and then these global action networks. Somehow they should all be working together to generate the news and the feel and the ontology that we're trying to generate. But I really want to emphasize, and let's have a separate Zoom about that and think about, because obviously your input is amazing and could really help. But to really keep in mind what Pat was describing before is that on the one hand, here we are, the usual suspects, generating the good news. But the real task is how to make that attractive to people who not only don't care, but might be actively against what we're trying to generate. That is almost the bigger part of the problem. So yes, balance, yes, compassion, yes, all of these things, but it's also more than that. This is where play and energy, creativity become the attractors towards the things that we might, as the usual suspects, want to offer the world. So it's a big and complex task, which is mostly geared towards the most people who are not us. But somehow to bring to the most people the things that we're trying to show will regenerate the planet. That's quite a task and a narrative building exercise, and one that looks a lot like what Violetta was acting out a minute ago, which is like sort of like that.
Yeah,
Indra,
allow me just one quick comment that when you were describing that is maybe the stories of those people who are against or left out could find a way in this proactive alternative media, but with a fresh spin to open, maybe broaden the minds of those that are behind this news.
Yeah,
not excluding them, but including them, but with a fresh new look, different spin, bringing them in the circle in a way that they would maybe have additional thought about it. But as I proposed a couple of things, I'm sure we're going to follow up on that one. And especially, we already agreed to host a special eco-civilization talk in the first quarter of next year on alternative media. So hopefully the Alternative UK will be part of this discussion. So that will be great.
great.
So Indra, I know that people would love to continue to talk. I mean, it's been a really engaging, very rewarding discussion, but it's already 7:30.
And I have to run off, and I'm sure Pat does, and I'm sure everybody
exactly.
does.
But we are so honored and happy that you guys were actually so engaged and that you felt welcome, and that this is one of those little spaces where you have touched people out of your common circles, out of those that are already convinced, and especially strengthen the need for this kind of open discussions also about politics, media, and new shifts that Karen, new paradigms and shifts within those paradigms that Karen was talking about. I certainly got very much inspired, and I hope I share share this energy with the rest of the audience. But the time, we have to say the end, because it is time to say the end. And I hope that this is just the beginning of a long-lasting relationship and even closer collaboration. So absolutely. I hope, Indra, we can talk further in the forthcoming days on this. Let me just say at this point that Connectathon, yet another attempt to bring the world together and to bring this, to recognize the fractals that are all over the world and let them know that there is a pool and there is an ocean of different thoughts and individuals and groups that are already trying to walk the same path towards some maybe still unidentified common dream, but it's emerging nicely. And that's going to be 24 hours for humanity on the 22nd from 4 p.m. in the Central European time till 23rd of September, 4 p.m. Central European time. We're going to host 24 different sessions, and we'll see what's going to emerge. I mean, we are definitely here, Indra, in your role, observers, looking excited into this pool of emergence and see what's going to really come out. So maybe you can join us. Maybe you can just follow up the emerging results. But in any case, let's build on this long-lasting relationship that can probably benefit both circles. Thank you very much.
For
Really.
sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And
Bye-bye all.
see you very
Bye-bye.
soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.